Hello everyone, and welcome to another video from scriptingisfun.com. I'm Mike Page, and today we're going to be looking at how to make a simple number guessing game. So this is really a very beginner type of a tutorial. If you're just getting into Unity, this is a great way to learn about the user interface and also some basic game logic, input and output, things like that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go into Unity. I'm using Unity 2017.3, which is the current version that's launched at this time, and I'm going to make a new project. So here we are, new project in Unity. Let's call this our number guessing game. We're going to set this for 2D, and we don't need analytics or anything, so we're just going to create that project. It'll take just a second for it to load up on our computer. In our new project then, what we want to do is set up our work area, our editor. I like to have, especially when I'm working with user interface things, I like to have the scene view and the game view both visible at the same time. A lot of times our setup is more like this, where we're sharing between the two. So if you want to pull the game tab off and have it in its own window, you can just grab right on the tab where it says game, and you can drag it off and you can dock it anywhere. I tend to find side by side like this works really well, and of course you can resize all these windows to fit what you want. So in this game, the computer is going to pick a random number and the player is going to have a certain number of guesses to try to guess it. So the first thing we want to do is set up some user interface. So to set up user interface, we need to have what's called a canvas. So we're going to go to our hierarchy and click the create button. We're going to go to UI canvas. Think of the canvas like your big piece of paper that you're writing and positioning all your user interface pieces on. Okay, now the canvas is going to draw off to the side. This is what my camera can see currently, this square here, but the canvas is a big square off to the side. So if I zoom out, it's this big huge thing right here. And this tends to confuse people when they first see it, because they think that this whole big box should actually be fitting on top of the little box here for their camera. And it will. The Unity will actually make this whole big box fit right inside the boundaries of our camera. They just draw it off to the side really big so that we can easily work on our canvas without having to mess around or see things that are actually in our scene. So don't worry about your canvas being big. We're going to leave this canvas alone. If we click it in the hierarchy and go look in the inspector, we can see the canvas has several components to it. We're going to leave these all default. This is what's called a screen space overlay canvas, and that just means that it'll size itself to match the size of our screen, and that's good. So the top left corner of our canvas will match the top left corner of our screen, so forth and so on. Okay, now that we have our canvas, we want to put some text on here. We're going to put some instructions for the name of our game up here. We're going to have a box here that we can send messages to. We can show instructions and feedback from the game, and we're going to need a couple of buttons. Anytime that you need to add a UI element, you can always go to the create button here and go to UI and get what you need. I always find, kind of as a shortcut, if I click on the canvas and then I right click it, I get the same menu. So I usually right click the canvas in the hierarchy, go to UI, and what I want is a text. So I'm going to drop a text in here. You'll notice that the text indents itself underneath the canvas, and that's exactly what we want. All items that are UI items must be a child of the canvas. If I was to drag this off the canvas, it disappears from my camera view here. So when I drag it back on the canvas, it shows up. Now this text is really small and hard to read right here. It says new text right in the middle of my screen. We're going to change that here in just a second. But just be aware that your elements for your user interface have to be a child of the canvas. Now let's give this text a name here. So to rename things, you can either just click it here and change it, or you can go up here in the inspector and change it up here. And this is going to be my title text. It's always a good idea to name things as you make them, because if you have several text boxes in here and they're all named text and text 1, 2, 3, it's really kind of gets confusing and harder to find things that you want to work with. So, and I usually, if it's a text, I usually include the word text in the name, just so that reminds me that yes, this is a text and not a button or a slider or whatever. UI element that I'm working with. So now I've got title text. Over here in the inspector, I can see all the things I can change. One of the things I can change is what's displayed in the text box. I can also change the font size and color, so we'll do a lot of that. First thing though you might want to do is position the text box and size it to the size you want it to be on your screen. So if you are right clicked in here on your rect tool, that's short for rectangle tool, you can actually just go in the middle here somewhere and grab and drag this all around, and you can see in your game view where it's going. So I'm going to center this on the horizontal, and I'm going to take it up towards the top, and then I can just grab these little bubbles and pull out, or I can grab the side and pull out. I'm going to go ahead and make this kind of a bit bigger here, make a nice big title at the top. If you want this to be centered, you can either just kind of grab it and pull it till it snaps into the center, or if you look up here in the rect transform component, you can see that there's an X position and a Y position. If X position is set to 0, then this will be centered horizontally on your screen. Okay, so we have that. You can also change the width and the height of your box right here with these numbers as well. Next thing we want to do is we want to set our anchor point. All these UI elements will anchor themselves to a part of the screen. So this one right now is set to the middle center. You can see it right here. You can also see when I have it selected, I've got this little X in the middle. That tells me that this text box is anchored to the center. So if my screen resolution was to shrink, the box here, my title box, is going to try to stay about as far away from the center as it is now. So that's probably not the best place to anchor it. Usually you want to pick a spot on the screen that you want it to stay the same distance away from. So in this case, I always want it to stay up on the top center of the box. So I'm going to change the anchor point from the center middle to the center top. To do that, I go to the inspector, I click right here. It looks like a little crosshairs thing. That's my anchor presets. And there's a lot of anchor presets for all the corners and centers of the screen. I'm going to click this top one here, which is for top center. See top here, center here. The X moved to the top center, and now this text box will always try to stay the same distance away from the top of the screen and centered on it as it is right now. That's what I want. To get rid of this, you can just click it again to make it go away. And now we've got that locked in. Okay, let's make this text a little bigger so we can see it. So here in the font size, let's say we try a 50. That's a nice big font size. And then let's see, we can align it. Here's our alignment. So maybe we'll center align horizontally, and we can center align vertically. Let's just put it right in the middle of our box. And then to change the text, we can go here in the text part, and we can just type in what we want. So this is going to be my number guessing game. So we'll type that in there. And let's change this font color here so that it shows up a little better on our blue background. So right here in the color area, you've got the color bar. Just click in there. You'll get your color picker, and you can pick whatever color you want. So maybe kind of a yellow color would look good on this blue. A nice contrasting color makes our text pop out. Okay. So that is how we set up our text element. There are many more things we can do here. We can load in different fonts if we want to. We can tell it we want bold or italics or bold and italics. We can do a lot here with our text. So one thing to notice with text boxes is if your text box gets too small for the text. See right now how it wrapped to the next line? But if there isn't a next line, see how it chopped off the game part? And if it gets too small, it won't hardly show anything. Okay, so you got to make sure you get it sized how you want it. There's a couple of ways that you can work with how the text overflows in your box, and that's right here. Horizontal overflow is set to wrap, so it'll try to wrap to the next line if there is one. Vertical overflow is to truncate, which means just not to show it. If you're going to be changing the text in a box often and you're not sure how long it's going to be, you might want to set these to overflow. That will tell Unity that it's okay if the text overflows the box. Just make sure you're thinking about that though. If your box is positioned next to another one, you don't want text on top of text. So just be careful how you use that. I'm just going to leave it with wrap and truncate here because this text is never going to change in this box. This is just going to be my title that I'm going to leave up there the whole time the game is playing. So we've got one text box done. We're also going to need a text box to give some sort of message to the player. So we're going to make another text box. Again, I'm going to go to my canvas. I'm going to right click. I'm going to go to UI and text. I get another text box right in the center. This one here, I'm going to move up a little bit, and let's just make it bigger. This is going to be for sending messages to the player, so let's make it kind of big so we have several lines that we can work in. And we'll try to center that up again. If you put X position 0, that'll lock it right there. Now for an anchor point for this one, this box is pretty much covering part of the center of the screen, so I'm just going to leave an anchor to the center. That should be just fine for an anchor point, so I don't have to change it there. Let's set our font size, so let's try maybe a 30. We want it big enough that people can see it and not have it strain their eyes. Now another thing I should have mentioned earlier is when you start working in UI, you want to make sure that you have set the resolution of your game. So in your game window here, you've got this drop down. A lot of times by default, Unity is in free aspect. Free aspect tells it to use as much space as we have visible. So as I change this, it changes the size of my camera. I don't want that. Especially when I'm using UI, I need to know what my resolution in my finished game is going to be. So most times I just use standalone, which is 1024 by 768 pixels. You can actually hit the plus sign here and set your own custom resolution in pixels, or you can frame it in a 16 by 9 if you want to. I usually just use standalone, especially if I'm working on a game that's just going to be run on a computer. So make sure you set your resolution so that as you position these things, you can see over here in the game view exactly how they're going to fit on the screen, and that way you won't have problems with making it look good one way, but then in your finished product, a different resolution, your text is all over the place. Okay, so got this new text box. Let's go ahead and rename this. We'll just call this our message text. And in our message text here, we've sized it up to 30. Let's change that font color again to, let's kind of stick with a yellowy kind of font. Maybe we make it kind of similar. We can match it exactly, or we can make it a slightly different shade of yellow there. Depends on what your tastes are. I'm also going to center this text horizontally like that. I'm not going to do it vertically because as more lines end, I don't want it popping up and down. So let's go ahead and tell it to stay to the top centered. And then you can also see how many lines of text you can fit here. So I could hit enter and go down. Let's just see how many lines fit in my box right now. So it looks like when I get to 7, it chops off at this font size. So I actually have 6 lines of text I could send to the box if I wanted to. I'm not going to need that many messages or that many lines for the messages in this game, but I think I'll leave it that size anyway for now, just so that we can see. You can even pull this up a bit until it gets to just enough for that 6th line. And then we can just kind of clear all this text out, and then we will type in the message we want to have on the screen when the game starts. So we might say something like, welcome. So we'll go down the line and we'll say, bet you can't guess my number. We'll go down our line and say, click the start button to begin. There we go. So here's my nice little welcome message to the player of my game. I'm giving them some hints here as to what this game is about. It's about guessing my number, and I'm giving them some instructions for what to do. Even though if you see a start button, you probably can figure out you're supposed to click it. Never hurts just to kind of direct people where you want them to go. So now if I'm talking about a start button, that means I need a start button. So let's add ourselves a button to the screen. So we're going to go back to our canvas. We're going to right click, go to UI menu, and let's get this 4th one down called button. That's going to drop a button. This is our default Unity button right here in the middle of our screen. I'm going to go up here and grab it with my rect tool and drag it down a little bit. You want to be careful not to get these UI elements inside of each other, because sometimes they can get in the way of each other as far as detecting clicks on the screen and things like that. So I'm going to drag him down here. Let's make him a little bigger. He doesn't have to be super big. Again, I can make sure X0 will center him on the screen. And then thinking of anchor point, he is closer to the center than any other part of the screen, so we'll go ahead and leave him a middle center point. Alright, so buttons are a little different. Buttons, you see, has a little arrow here. If I flip that open, you see there's a text element sitting underneath the button. This text element is a standard text, just like our 2 text boxes we made on the screen here. So it's a standard text, but it is a child of the button, and it is set to stretch on the width and the height of the button. So that's why you see these little triangles. That's your X, but they've been separated apart. So it will stretch to fill whatever size I make the button. That's the size of the text box that I can put the text in. So we're just going to leave that alone. And then right here is where we can change the text that's displayed on the button. So if you want to change the text, you go to the text child of the button here. Let's make this say start. Let's make this text nice and big so that it fills in the button nicely. We might even go as big as a 40 here. And let's think what color we want this button to be. So this color here will change the color of my text. So see how that's changing the color of my text there? So we need to kind of figure out what color we want the button to be before we figure out what color the text should be. So to change the button color, we actually click on where it says button, and button has a color right here. So we can change that from white to a different color. Maybe we make this a maybe kind of a darker blue. Let's see how that looks. Maybe we make it kind of a bright blue there. Okay, we'll try that. And then we can go back to the text here, and maybe we'll just kind of make our text kind of match the colors we're already using. So let's take that text up into a yellowish kind of text here. Something like that. Alright, so that's how you change the color. You can also, on the button, right here there's a source image. This is set right now to the default UI sprite. You can actually make custom buttons in a program like Photoshop. You just make your button on a transparent background and save it out as a PNG file. You can bring it into Unity and you can assign that to the button. So then you can have buttons that are circles or different shapes because you can draw it like that and have a transparent background for you don't want it to show. So we've got our button set up here. Now the other part of the button is we have some colors here. These are tints. So right now our transition on our button is set to color tint, and we have a normal color, a highlighted color, and a pressed color, and these are different shades of gray, white to black basically, but different shades of gray. So if I hit play here now, my button should be active. When I hover over it, see how it darkened in just a little bit, and when I click down on it, it darkens more. So that is controlled by these highlight colors. So if I wanted the button to instead of to darken down, if I wanted it to brighten up, I could come over here and tell it normal color and drag it down a little bit so it's a little darker. And then I could go to highlighted color and make sure that's really bright. And now if I go in here and I hover, see how it brightens up? So you can control how it looks. And then when I click and hold down, of course, it darkens. You do want the button to react to mouse overs and the clicks because that's how people know it's an actual real live button that they can click and expect it to do something. So that's some of the other pieces that you have there. Of course, if you change any settings while you're in play mode, they don't get saved, so it reverted back, and I'm fine with the defaults for now, so I'm just going to leave it. But just be aware of when you're in play mode, any changes you make in the inspector, they don't stick around. They get discarded when you come out of play mode. Alright, so I have my start button here, and I'm all ready to move on to the next part of my game. So when I click this start button, what I want it to do is I want it to give some instructions here in my text box. I also want it to put a text box on the screen that the player can type a number into, and I want, instead of a start button, I want it to have a button that says guess, that when they click it, that tells the computer they have made a guess. So we're going to need to do just a little bit of code, and then we're going to make sure that when we click the start button, it calls a function in that script that will change the text on the screen. So let's go to our project panel here and create a C# file. We're just going to call this guessing game, or yeah, we'll just call this guessing game. And then let's open that up in MonoDevelop. In MonoDevelop, we have our guessing game file open, and what we're going to need to do is we're going to need a function in here that can be called by our button. So I'm going to just make a new function down here in the bottom of my script. We need to make this a public function because we want this function to be called from outside the script. So that's why you would say public. And then we're going to say void because we are not returning a value from this function. We're just doing some commands. And then let's call this start game. So here's our public void start game, and what I want start game to do is I want it to reach out to that message text on the screen and change what's there. So before I can do that, I actually have to have a variable that can store a reference to that text box. So we're going to go up to the top of our script here where we put our public variables, and I'm going to make a public variable. Again, I want to see this out in the inspector, so I make it public. We're going to call this message text, and it's going to be of type text to hold the text box. Now, if I start typing text in here, you see that the autocomplete doesn't find it. That's because when we're working with UI, we actually need to tell Unity that we want to use all the UI methods. So we have to go up here to the top where the using statements are and add one. So we want to tell it we're using the Unity engine, and what we want from that is the UI. So using Unity engine UI tells Unity, hey, go out and grab all the UI things that I can do, the user interface, and make it accessible to the script. So now you notice that it recognized what a text was. And this is going to be our message text. So now I have a variable that can hold a text element, a UI text, called message text. I'm going to save my script. I'm going to go out into Unity. I'm going to let it process here for a second. And then here's my script. Now, I need to give the script to something in my hierarchy. These are all the objects in my scene. I need that to be attached there so that it will run. In a small game like this, I most always just drop it on the main camera. So I'm going to grab my script here. I'm going to drop it on the main camera. If I click on the main camera now, I'll see the guessing game script over here in the inspector. You see the variable I just made, message text, and it says none text. So we set the variable up on the script, but now we have to actually tell it what text box we're talking about. So I can either go over here and grab message text from the hierarchy and drag it down and drop it in the box. Now it knows that, hey, it's the message text I want. Or I can click the little circle here, which will open up a menu here that shows me the different texts that I have available. So I've got message text, title text. This text here is actually the text on my button. So I could select message text from here and close the window, and it'll be there as well. So I've established the connection. I've stored a reference to the message text box in my script. Once I have that, I can go back in my script here now, and I can, through the variable I set up, message text, I can tell it go to the text that's being displayed. So that's in the .text property. And I can set that equal to something. Now this is a string, so it needs quotes. And in the quotes, I can tell it what I want. So I might say something like, I have picked a number between 1 and 100. All right, and then if I want to split this onto several lines, then I can do this. I'm going to make it do a line break. So I'm going to put a plus, which means to the end of this section that I just typed, this sentence, add something. Inside of quotes, I'm going to put a \n. That means go to the next line, and then I have to add on to that, and I can put another sentence for the next line. Can you guess it? Okay, so I'm going to tell them I picked a number between 1 and 100. Can you guess it? And then let's do one more line. So again, a plus. We'll put /n in there, a plus for the next part, and then on the next line we'll say type your guess in the box below and click the guess button. Now you notice as I've been typing that it's pushed all this over. This is a really long line of code. So it is okay to come maybe right here after this plus sign and hit enter. And we can actually make this line of code go across 2 lines. Just don't break it in the middle of a string here. Do it at one of the plus signs, and then you can actually get it to fit so you can see it all on the screen. So I'm going to have 1, 2, 3 sentences here, 3 lines of code. They're going to be broken by lines by these go to new line commands that are here. All right. So when I call start game, it's going to go to my message text box. It's going to change the text there to do this. So I'm going to save that in Unity, or save that monodevelop. I'm going to go back out to Unity now, and now I have to make it so the button knows when I click it that I want it to go to the script that's attached to my camera and call that function off that script. So if I click on the button here has this area here called OnClick. this is the place where I can tell it what to do when it's clicked. So to add an OnClick event, I go to the plus sign here, and then I have to give it the object I want it to go to do something with. So I want it to get the script, my guessing game script. The guessing game script is on my camera. So I'm going to grab my main camera and drag it into the object box. Then in this box that says no function, this drop down, this shows me all the different components that are on my camera. So one of those components is my script, guessing game. So I'm going to go there, and if I made that a public function, it will show up in the list here. So I want public function start game. Here it is right here. I select it. So basically I've told the button now when I click you, go get the script from the camera, the guessing game script, and call the start game function. So now we should be all set up. Let's test it out. We hit play. I go here now and click start, and my text has changed. So you see how it's breaking it into lines. Now in this case I overflowed, so it broke my last sentence into two. So I could either go in and tweak that so that it breaks it where I want it to, or I could leave it alone. It really just kind of matters on how you want to present the text on the screen. Okay, but it put it out there. So matter of fact, let's play with it here a bit. While it's running, I can play with the width of my box here. There we go. And if I just make the box a little bit wider, then it will fit. So remember, these changes won't stay when I stop playing. So I got to look. I'm about a width of 815 and a height of 204. So when I go back out, let's go ahead and make this like maybe 820, and we'll leave it at the 204, and it should now fit my text. There we go. And I should probably put like a period here and a period here just so I have some punctuation. So we can do that. We can just go back in here and put a period there and a period here. Save my game, and then when I go back out, those changes should be showing up. So we'll play. We'll click start, and there we go. So we've got it showing our text. Now the next thing we need to do is we need to make a few more UI elements here for our game. We're going to need a input field that will allow us to type some text into a text box and to capture it. So let's go ahead and make that. We're going to go to our canvas. We're going to right click it. We're going to go to UI input field. This one right here. That's going to drop a little text box in here that allows us to type text into the editor here. So I'm going to go ahead and just put this kind of down here in the same area as my start button. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. We'll go ahead and take a closer look at this input field. Input fields, when you open them up in the canvas here, have two pieces underneath them, two children. One's a placeholder. The placeholder is a text box that has this placeholder text. So see where it says enter text here, that is right here. I'm going to change that to say enter guess, and maybe we want to make this a little bigger because I made the box bigger here by dragging it. So let's make the font here more like a 25, and let's center it vertically and horizontally so it sits in the middle of the box. So that's my placeholder text. The other text here, this is the text where the player will actually be typing in the response. So same thing, I should probably make the font size here a little bigger, and let's actually make the color darker so that's a little bolder, and then we'll set this also to center and center. Alright, so if we hit play here, if I click in the box here and start typing, you'll see that now I'm getting some text in there. And if you look at I have the text selected here in the hierarchy, you see over here that text I'm typing is going into the text box here of that text element. So that is how we set up our input text field. Okay, placeholder text and the text. Alright, so that's set up. Now you notice I stacked this on top of the button. That's because when I click the start button, I'm going to take it away, and I want this input text field to show up. So let's work on how we might do that. I'm going to have more buttons in the game, so let's actually give this button here a name. So it's actually the start button, and let's then go to our start button, and we're going to add another OnClick event. Right now when we click the start button, it goes to the camera and calls the start game function. I'm going to hit plus in the OnClick area to add another event. Now this time what I want the start button to do is I want it to go to itself, and I want it to disable itself. So I'm going to drag the start button into the object. So the start button is going to go to itself. And then for no function, we're going to go to game object. This gets me the game object component of our game object. And one of the things we can do here is go to set active. So I'm going to go to set active. If I leave this box unchecked, that will deactivate the start button's game object. So it'll disappear from the screen. And then the other thing I'm going to do is when I click the start button, I want it to make the input field visible. So the input field, when the game starts, we're going to go up here to the top of the inspector and we're going to uncheck its box. That'll make it invisible. That's deactivating it. So now when I click the start button, I want to turn that back on. So in the start button here again, I'm going to hit the plus sign to add another OnClick event. I'm going to drag in the input field, drop it in there, and then same thing. I'm going to go to the input field's game object. I'm going to say set active. Now this time I want it to be active, so I'm going to check the box. If the box is unchecked, it will turn it off. A box checked means set it true to active. So let's test this out and see what it does so far. So we start the game. We have our title, our text, we have our start button. I click the start button. The start button has now deactivated itself, and the text is changed, and I now have my nice enter guess box here on the screen that I can click into and I can type into. Alright, now we're going to need one more piece here for our game to work. And we talked about having them click the guess button. So we actually have to make that guess button. So let's just copy our start button here. So I can right click it and say duplicate. Let's click in here and change its name to guess button. And then we can go and change the text on the button right here. So go over here and change the text. We'll make that guess. And then let's see where it is in relation to our input field. So let's actually move this down a bit like this so that our input field won't be in the way. Alright, and then at the beginning of the game we want the guess button to be invisible. We want to deactivate it, so we're going to uncheck it. And then the last thing we want our start button to do is to turn that guess button back on. So if I go back to my start button, I can add a fourth OnClick event here. Hit the plus sign. This time I want it to affect the guess button, so I drag that in. And then right here I drop open the no function thing, go to game object, set active, and make sure we check the box for true. So this will now cause the guess button to become visible. So we will test again. We click start and start goes away, but our guess button pops up and our enter guess button is there, our text input field. Alright, so that's most of the UI that we need set up here for our game. Now we got to go back into our script and we have to get a little bit happening there. So the first thing we need to do is we need to have a way of knowing how to get the guess that's entered in here into our script. So in our script we're going to add another public variable. So we're going to make a public, this is going to be an input field. So that is the name of that UI element I just put in. It's an input field, and we'll call it guess input. So we've made a variable that we can store a reference to our input field in. Just like we did for message text, we made a variable to store the text. Now we're making a variable to store the input field. I'm going to save that. Go back out to Unity, click on my camera because my camera has the script attached to it, and I can see now my public variable. So now I have this new one, input guess, that needs to get an input field. So I'm going to grab my input field from the hierarchy here. I'm going to drag it down here and drop it into my guess input. Now I've established the connection between the two. Now that I have that, I'm going to write a function that I want to run every time my guess button is clicked. Alright, so let's make another public void function. Remember, we have to make it public because we want the button to be able to call it. And this is going to be get guess. Alright, so public void get guess. And what we want to do here now is when the guess button is clicked, the player is telling us that they made a guess in the guess box. So we are going to then go out and grab the guess they typed in. So we're going to go to our input field, which we call the guess input, and we have to go to the text of that. So guessed input.text will get me the value that is in that input field's text box. So this is what the player has typed in. So we're going to have that. Now we need to store that in something. So let's make a temporary string variable here called guess string, and we'll set that equal to this text. Okay, so the thing to know is an input field, whatever's typed in there is actually going to come in as text. It's going to come in as a string. So I'm going to store that right here as the guess string. So let's save that. The next thing we need to do is we need to convert this from a string to an integer, because we're actually going to have the computer pick a number and we're going to need to compare that number to an integer to an integer. So we're going to make an integer variable here. We'll call this our guess int, and we'll set that equal to system.convert we're going to say convert, and then we want this one to int32, and we have to give it the string that we want it to convert. So the string is going to be my guess string. So we'll feed guess string into here. This will convert the string number into an integer number and store it in guess int. Alright, once we have that, let's just check to see how this is working. Let's just do a debug.log real quick to test it, and we'll say give us guess int. Okay, now out in Unity I have to set my guess button up so that it will call that get guess function. Now when I duplicated the button, I also got some OnClick things here. I don't want these OnClick event things from the start button, so let's just hit them. Let's just click on one here and let's minus it out. We just minus all those out. Okay, that's one thing we didn't pay attention to when we copied the start button. The guess button, we're going to add one event to it. We're going to put our camera into the object box because we want the script that's on the camera. We're going to drop this down and go to my guessing game script, and I'm going to go to get guess. So now when I click the guess button, it will call get guess. So let's test out and see if our function runs when we click it. So we click start. Right here, let's enter a number, maybe 55, and we hit guess. And you see in the console down here that it did actually print out the 55, and this is my integer 55 that I typed in there. Alright, I've typed the string in, it converted it. That's the converted one. Alright, so this is working. We have managed to capture the text, convert it into an integer, and then we did a debug. So I can get rid of this debug now because I know that that's working. Okay, so the next thing we need to do now that we're capturing the guess is we need to have the number that the computer has picked. So when we click the start button, we want to have the computer generate a random number between 1 and 100. So I'm going to make a place up here at the top to store it. We'll make it public for now so we can see it in the inspector. This will be an integer, and we'll call this computer's number. Then down here in the start function, after we do our text here, we will just go ahead and generate a random number. So we'll say computer's number equals, to generate a random number, we say random.range, and then we need to give it a minimum number and a maximum number. So we want the 1, and then we put a comma in here, and then I'm going to put this so you can see the integer version. We're doing an integer here. It's important to pay attention to these because this says it returns a random integer number between a minimum, which is inclusive, and a max, which is exclusive. So inclusive means it includes the number. So right now this 1 is included. It could pick a 1. If I type the 100 here though as my max, that is exclusive. So that means it will exclude the 100. So the biggest number it could possibly pick is a 99. I told the player I'm going to pick it between 1 and 100, so I actually want it to go all the way to 100. So that means I just need to make this 101, and now it will exclude the 101, but it will go all the way up to 100. So now we've had the random number chosen. So we can save that and see if it actually is picking a random number. We'll go back out to Unity here, and let's click on our camera so we can see computer number. When I hit play here, it will stay 0. When I click start though, it fills in with a number. So that time we got a 48. We can test it again just to make sure we're getting different numbers. Click it, now I got an 83. So it is picking different random numbers every time, and that's going to be the computer's number that we are trying to guess. Now that we have the two numbers that we need to work with, we've got the computer's number and we have the guess integer from the player. Now we can actually start comparing them to see if the player guessed too low or too high, or if they got the number exactly right, and give some feedback out to the player through the message text. So we're going to do a conditional statement here. The first one we will ask for is if guess int is greater than computer's number. So basically the player guessed a number that was too high. Then what we want to do is tell the player that. We're going to say message text dot text. So just like we did up here in the start game function, message text dot text, go to the message text box and change its text. And this time I'm going to say too high, guess lower. Okay, so now if they're guess too high, they'll guess lower. We can also then add an else if after this, and we can say that if guess int is less than computer's number, then we can send a different message. We can say message text dot text equals too low, guess higher. Alright, so now we've handled two of the possible three things that we could have with these two numbers. We could have the guess the player put into the computer to be bigger than the computer's number, or it could be less than. If neither of these is true, then they had to have guessed the actual right number. So in this case, we don't have to ask if guess int is equal to computer number. We can know that it is because we've already taken out all the other options, and we can just do an else here. So if this isn't true, it'll check to see if this is true. If that's not true, it'll just do the else. And in the else, we're just going to do message text dot text equals you guessed it. And there we go. And for some reason I have an extra parenthesis here, so let's go ahead and delete that. So now let's go ahead and test this out. We'll save it. We'll hit play. And let's see what the number is. So the computer has picked 77. I can see that right here. So let's put in a low guess, like a 55. And it told me too low, guess higher. Okay, let's put in a number that's too big. So we'll do 80. And now it says too high, guess lower. Good, so far so good. Now let's do 77, and it says you guessed it. So we now have it giving us proper feedback after comparing the two numbers together, so the player knows which way to guess or if they've won. The next thing we need to do now is start keeping track of how many guesses the player has made. So let's go back into our script here. We're going to need a variable to keep track of how many guesses we're going to give the computer or give the player. So let's make a public int number of guesses. So that will be the number of guesses the player has. We will go ahead and set that out in the inspector for how many number of guesses we want them to have. And then every time they make a guess, let's just take away 1 from number of guesses. So we can just do that right up at the top here even. Number of guesses minus minus. We'll subtract 1 from the number of guesses and then store the guesses remaining back in that variable. So that'll take 1 away from our guesses. Alright, so then at the bottom here, after we've checked through all of our guesses here to see if it was too high, too low, or if they got it, let's also do a check here to see if we are out of guesses now that we've evaluated this. So we will ask if number of guesses is less than or equal to 0. If that's the case, we're out of guesses, time for game over. So we'll send something to our message text that says something like, out of guesses, the number was, because you don't want to leave them hanging here, right? You want them to know what the number is so they're not frustrated. So I can put this text on the screen, put a plus sign at the end, and then I can have it just jam something onto the end of the sentence. So that would be computer's number. So we'll tell them what the computer's number was when they run out of guesses. All right, so now when they run out of guesses, we can tell them that. Let's go test this out in Unity, make sure it's working correctly. Make sure we can see our camera here so we can see. Now, we need to give a value to number of guesses, so let's go ahead and give 10 guesses. We can just set that right here, and Unity will remember that. Now, so when we hit play here, we'll start. Let's just give a guess. So the computer picked a number. Let's give it a different number here, and let's just guess. So I've got, if you look over here, you can see we've got 9. Every time I click, it goes down by 1. Let's go to 1. Okay, got 1 guess left. I guess, and now I'm at 0 guesses, and it says out of guesses, the number was 69. Okay, now we are going to have to account for something here because, of course, I can continue to guess after the end, but also if I was to have guessed the correct number on the very last guess, let's go back into our script. If I had guessed the correct one at the very last guess, it would still tell me I'm out of guesses the number was. So we do have to have a way to make sure that if they did get it right, we don't do this. That's a little bit of some logic that we'll have to add in here. But for now, we have the basis of this working. We're taking 1 away for number of guesses. We're checking at the end to see if we're out after we've evaluated the guess here. And that's what we wanted to do so far. All right, so now we have to talk about winning and losing the game because they're either going to win or lose. We know they've lost if they get to here. We know they've won if they get to here. All right, so we're going to need in 2 places to end the game. At the end of the game, what we want to do is we want to take away, so let's go here for and play where we can see our screen. So when the game is over, we want to take away the input guess field, and we want to take away the guess button. And we're going to replace it with a button for playing again and for quitting. So let's start by getting rid of these 2 boxes here when the game is over. So since we're going to need to do this from 2 different places in our code, we should make a new function that we can call that will have all those instructions. That way we're only typing the instructions in once. So I'm going to go down here below my public void get guess, and I'm going to make a void function called game over. This does not need to be public. We're not going to call it from outside the script. We're going to have this called internally from our getGuess function. So when the game is over, we want to turn off a few things. So we already have, let's go up to the top here. We already have a link to our input field through this variable guess input. So since we have that reference, we can actually just tell guess input to turn itself off. So down here in our function, we can say guess input dot game object. So the guess input is an input field. I actually want to go to the game object part of that. So I type in game object, and then if I'm at the game object, I can call the set active property here, or method. So I can set active to false. All right, so this says go to the guess input variable, which is a input field, go to its game object, and then on the game object I can set active false. Alright, now I've got this line of code here in my game over function. Game over is not going to be called unless we call it, right? It doesn't happen automatically. So let's put a call to game over function in the 2 places we need it. So one of the places is right here where we said, and we're going to actually need a set of curly brackets here because we're going to have more than one command, so let's put those in. If you're only going to have one command to run in a else or an else if, then you don't need the brackets here, but I usually drop them in anyway just so we're always doing the same thing. I didn't do it here because I just had one line of code that was running. In this case, so I am going to drop them in, so I've got 2 lines of code that I want it to run here. So not only do I want it to say message text.text, but the game is now over, so let's call game over. Remember, we call a function just by saying its name, put the parentheses there, and a semicolon at the end. That'll cause game over to run. We also want game over to run if we run out of guesses, because the game is also over now. There's no more guesses left. So we'll call game over from here as well. Alright, so now if I save this, go back out into Unity, and if we try this out, we should see it work. So the number is 3, so if I type the 3 in and hit guess, it took away my input field. See how my input field is now unchecked? So really set active false just unchecks that box there, which takes it away. We could also test this. It's always good to test it both ways. So let's actually try to lose here. So the number is 86. So let's put a different number in there, and we'll just guess till we run out of guesses. 1 guess left. I made it. Out of guesses. It took my box away. So win or lose, it's doing what I want it to do by calling game over. All right, the next thing we need to do is we need to also turn off the guess button. So the guess button will be active when the game is playing. So let's figure out how to do that part. Okay, so the first thing we need from our code here is we need a reference to the guess button. Just like we had a reference here to our input text field here, we need one for that button. So we're going to need to make a variable. So let's make it public so we can set it up in the inspector. This is a button, so we can even just give it a button variable, and we'll call this guess button. And should not capitalize that. There we go. Lowercase on our variables. So we've got a public button called guess button. And then down here in our script, we could do the same exact thing to our guess button. We can just say guess button dot game object. So we're going to the game object of that button, and then we're going to call set active, and we'll want it to turn off, so we'll put false in there. Helps if I spell false correctly. There. Okay, so now that should turn off my guess button as well. So we save the script. There's one more step here. We make the variable. We go ahead and turn it inactive, and then out in Unity, we see the variable here, but see how it says none here? So we actually need to tell the script here which one of our buttons out here we're talking about. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab my guess button right here from the hierarchy, drag and drop it into the box here, and now the script will have a reference to this particular button, the guess button, and that will also turn off. So again, we can test it. The number is 51. Let's go ahead and just put the 51 in here, and now it took away the button as well. So that cleans those buttons up. We don't want the player to have access to those once they've won or lost. Alright, now the next thing we need to do is present them with a button to play again or to quit. So I'm going to make a couple of new buttons out here in my canvas. Now, if you like the buttons that you're currently using, like the start button and the input field, or not the input field, but the guess button, if you like those, then what we can do is we can actually just duplicate those buttons. So let's go to the start button here. Let's just duplicate it. I can right click it. I can go to duplicate. I get a new button here. It's sitting on top of the old one right in the same spot, so I can just grab and drag it over. And then let's change its name here right away so we don't get confused about what button does what. This will be my play again button. So we'll give that a name. And then let's go in here and change the text on it to say play again. There we go. And you notice it's a little bit tight on the buttons. So let's just tweak the font size down a couple of points. There we go. To 35. Okay, now the other thing to remember is if you duplicate a button, you get all of its OnClick events as well. I don't want this to do all these, so let's go in here and just minus out all the OnClick events from the play again button. We'll be adding events to that here later. Alright, now that I've got that button set, let's just go ahead and duplicate this one. So right click it, duplicate, let's rename it here to quit button. And then let's just drag it over here maybe on this side. And we'll go to the text and change it to say quit. Alright, so now we got two buttons here. We've got a play again button and a quit button. Now when the game begins, we don't want to see these. So let's just turn these off right here at the beginning. So play again button, let's uncheck the box up here so it's deactivated. Quit button, same thing. We'll just set it up so at the beginning they're not visible. Alright, we'll save our scene there. Okay, now that we have the two buttons, we need from our code to be able to reach out to those buttons and set them active. Alright, so it's the same process we just went through here. We're going to use the same command with a set active true instead of false, but the first thing we need is a reference to those buttons. So that means we have to make two new variables, one for each button. So let's make a public button. This will be play again button, and then let's make another one, public button, quit button. So we'll make some variables. Then with those variables, we can go down here and we can say play again button. We'll go to its game object, and then we can call set active. And this time we want it to become visible, so we say true here. All right. We could even copy this line now. Let's make another one and paste it in. And let's just change this to say quit button. So now we're going to the play again button and the quit button to their game objects and turning them on at the end of the game. So we'll save our script. So again, remember there's kind of three steps to this. You make the variable. We can then use the variables down here, but then we have to go out into Unity and we actually have to link those variables in. We actually have to tell them which buttons we're talking about. So on the main camera that has the guessing game script, we've got our two new variables here. I need to tell it what the play again button is and what the quit button is. So let's drag play again button to play again button and quit button to quit button. There we go. Now if we play this, when we win or lose, so let's see, our computer picked 89. So when we win or lose, we get rid of the two boxes, the button and the input field that we wanted to, and we have a play again and a quit button show up in their place. Okay? So now what's left is to make play again and quit work correctly, and also to make sure that if we guessed it right on the last guess, that we don't get the you're out of guesses, we get the you won text. Okay? So let's start with just making play again and quit work correctly. So what we want to do when we click play again is we actually want play again to call a function in our script that will reload the game. And if they click quit, we want it to call a function in our script that will cause the window that this application is running in to close. So we need to make a couple of new functions in our script here. We want these to be public functions because we're going to call them from a button click. Just like we called start game and get guess from button clicks, same idea. So we want a public void. We'll call this play again. And what we want play again to do is we want it to reload the level. So we need to go to our scene manager. So to get access to those things, we have to add another using up at the top here. So we're going to say using Unity Engine dot scene management. That gets us access to some of the built-in functions for loading scenes and exiting scenes. So we actually want to access scene management. Then we can go down here into play again and we can say scene manager dot load scene. And the scene we want to load, we can give it either the string name, an int number, we can give it a load mode. So there's several things we can do here. We're just going to give it a scene name, so as a string. So that means we have to give it something in quotes here. What goes in the quotes here now is the name of my scene. If you don't remember the name of your scene, go out here in Unity and look at your scene file. I called it capital G game. You can also look up here at the top where it says whatever your name is .unity, that is your scene name. So I'm going to type in capital G game right here. That's the name of my scene, and it will load that scene. Now we need to do a couple things for this to work. First of all, out in Unity, we need to go to File, Build Settings, if we're going to start loading scenes, and before we actually would publish this game out, we'd have to do this anyway, we need to tell it what scenes are actually in our game, because we might have some that we don't include. So you can either just click Add Open Scenes, because you've got game scene open. You could also drag it in from the asset panel if you like as well. See, you have it now. It says game in here. It's got a check mark by it. That means that game is now included in my build. I can't load scenes, unload scenes, do anything unless they're listed in the scenes in build. So once you do that, you can just close that window. And then we just need to make the button call our function. So let's go to the Play Again button. Let's give it an OnClick event here. So hit the plus sign. Now I have to give the object that has the function I want to call. So that's on my main camera. So drag in the main camera. Find the script name, guessing game, find the function, play again. That's all there is to it. So let's test and see what happens. So if I hit play, let's make sure we can see the camera. We're going to start. Let's, number is 24. Let's just win it. There we go. And now when I hit play again, it should reset my game back to the beginning. So let's click it. There we go. It reset my game back to the beginning. If I go to the camera, you can see there's no computer number. The number guesses is back to 10. Everything is set up. If I start, it picks another number, and it's good to go. So we just basically loaded the brand new scene. That's the same as actually just stopping playing and hitting play again. It just resets everything. It unloads everything that was in memory in the current scene and loads the new one. So now we have it loading our scene. Now the other thing for quit, we also want a function to call, so we'll call public void, we'll call this quit game. And in this one, we want to say application.quit. Alright, so we're going to call another built-in method here, the quit method. This will cause the window that our game is running in to close. So the only downside to this is we can't see it working in the editor. In the editor, it won't shut the editor down or it won't take us out of play mode. So let's just put a little debug.log in here so we can actually see that it is going to this function. And we can get a little message telling us that this works. So we can say game quit. Something like that. That way at least we can see something happen out in the editor when we're testing. Alright, in your published version of the game, you wouldn't need this, right? Application quit would just exit it. So let's save that. Let's go out here into Unity. Let's click on our quit button, and we have to tell the quit button now that when it's clicked to run that quit game function. So we'll add an OnClick event. We'll drag in the camera because the script is on our camera. We will go to the script. We will find the quit game function and select it. So now, if we play, let's go to our camera so we can cheat here. Okay, 73. We guess it. It says you guessed it. If I click quit, you see down here now in the console, it gave me the message. So I know that it called the function, and if we had built this game out and clicked the button, it would have closed the window. Again, the application.quit does not do anything in the editor. You wouldn't want it to actually close your scene down and maybe lose changes you made. So there you go. We've got our game quitting and starting. We can play all the way through it. We just have one kind of minor issue to deal with. So it is possible, and let's actually go out and see if we can have it happen here so you see exactly what I'm talking about. So we're going to go play, we're going to hit start. The number is 85, so let's put in a wrong guess. Let's guess until we only have one guess left. Okay, I've got one guess left here. The number is 85. If I guess 85 on the last guess, it says out of guesses the number is 85. The player of your game is going to be a little upset at this point because they'll be like, wait a minute, I just guessed 85. So we actually have to make sure that if they get the guess correct on the very last guess, that we are checking for that first before we tell them that they're out of guesses. So let's go in here. Now, probably the easiest way to do this is right here. If they get to this part in our structure of if statements and they've guessed it, then we actually don't even want it to check this, right? So we want to just tell the function here that if it runs this else statement to just stop and not come back and do anything else. So we can actually go here and we can put the word return in here. Return in this case means just terminate the execution of this method. Okay, you can see it right here in the summary in the tooltip. It says the return statement terminates execution of the method in which it appears and returns control to the calling method. So basically, this says just stop right here. So if we get the correct answer, we're going to just immediately stop. We don't care if they have any guesses left because they won the game. So we don't care to even check this. So let's save that. Let's go back out here in Unity and test it now and see if that fixes our one little bug in our game here, our little glitch. So we'll click start. Okay, so the number is 56, so let's put in maybe a 44. Let's go ahead and guess until we have one guess left. Okay, one guess left here. Let's go ahead and put the 56 in there and hit guess. And there you go. See how it says you guessed it? So that fixes that loophole. Okay, one more thing that we should look at here. On our input field, so far we've been behaving ourselves and typing numbers in. But what if your player does something strange? Like let's go to play and let's go to start. What if they decide, hey, my number is the word hi, and they hit guess? You're going to notice that we get an error here. It says input string was not found in the correct format. That's because we are telling it in our script here, when it gets a guess, to convert it to an integer. You can't convert the word hi into an integer. So we need a way of restricting what kind of information they can type into the input field text box. So we're going to go here to the input field in Unity. Now right here we have a content type. And right now it says standard. But see how we can actually tell it what kind of content we're going to let it type in here? So there's one here for integer number. Let's just go ahead and give it integer number here. We also have a character limit. The character limit is the minimum number of characters I have to type in. So let's make sure they type in at least one character. Okay? And then I think that should probably fix our issue here. So let's set that up and let's go out here and test it. Let's go to our camera here. Alright, so let's enter a guess. Let's try to type in a word. I am typing all sorts of different letters and nothing is going in. Let's type in a number. Numbers go in just fine. I hit the 6 and it went. So next time I go in and I try to type letters in, can't do it. Try to type in special characters or symbols, can't do it. So that limits me just to integer numbers. Matter of fact, I could put an 8. I can't put a dot in here because I told it integer, so I can't even put a decimal number in there. So that restricts our player from doing something silly. You know, people will do things in your games that you never imagined that they would do. Alright, so that will fix that in our input field. If we were to play now and start our game and click a guess, I could put a number in here like 66. Oh, you know what I did? There's one mistake I made here. When I put the 1 in the input field, that actually is maximum characters. So let me put that to 3, because we could go up to 3 characters here if we put a 100. I made a little mistake there. That should be 3. This is not minimum characters. This is maximum. If you put a 0 there, then it says no maximum. Okay, so you can type as many as you want. This will keep people from typing like really big numbers into there and just being silly in your game. Alright, so that ends our tutorial on how to make a simple number guessing game using button clicks and input fields and some simple game logic. I hope you found this useful and helpful. This is a great starter project for new people to game design because it really has some basic logic in it. And you learn a lot of things like UI and how to type buttons in and a lot of the types of inputs and outputs that we use in our games. So as always, thanks for watching, and if you have any questions or comments, please put them in the comments below. Have a great day.